Welcome to the Accelerating Operational Performance podcast. I'm Greg Schinkel, your host as usual, president of Unique Training and Development, Frontline Leadership Systems. And this episode is really brought to you, or we're featuring our Plant Manager Excellence Program. This is a great way to enroll one or more of the plant managers in your organization into our multi-month development program. And you can check out more information on our website at uniquedevelopment.com. My guest today, I'm really excited, is someone who I've had the pleasure of doing business with over a number of years, Jeff Gallant, and I'd like to introduce him to you properly and make sure that I cover all of his credentials. So our guest today is experienced in operational transformation with over 3 decades of experience leading massive scale across some of Canada's most recognizable industrial brands. From his early days in continuous improvement at Michelin, to his most recent role as Vice President of Engineering Excellence and Health, Safety, and Environment at IPEX, Jeff Gallant has made a career out of turning complex problems into streamlined successes. At Purolator, he oversaw a $450 million operating budget and a team of 2,500 people, leading the single largest investment in the company's history. But more than just numbers, Jeff is a builder of people, known for breaking down silos and achieving record-high engagement scores. He's now entering what he's called the 4th period of his career. He and I are similar age, so I want to make sure it's clear it's not overtime yet. And he's here to share how to marry technical excellence with world-class leadership. Jeff, welcome to the podcast.
Great to see you again, Greg.
Yeah. So, Jeff, our relationship started when IPEX at the time was looking at frontline leadership and developing its people. But one of the things that always stood out for me is your personal involvement. I know we had Fiona from HR in those discussions, and it was a relatively small team, I think, that was looking at it. But you insisted on being part of it. And I wanted, even though I'd like to hear other things, I was just curious. It said that you're a champion of and a builder of people. Why is it that you decided, because not a lot of, I will say, not a lot of executives, and if you're an executive listening to the podcast, instead of handing this off, I want you to hear why Jeff decided to stay involved. It isn't because he was a micromanager. It's because he knows the importance of this. Jeff, can you share why you were involved in that really from the early days?
A couple things. One is maybe contrary to popular belief, even senior managers, senior leaders, executives don't know everything about frontline leadership, right? And I think through that program or through that involvement, I was reminded, or I learned things for a few times as well, and some of them I practiced and refer to since that period. And also as a leader and introducing change, you need to reinforce things, right? Yeah. It's a new language for some, and whether you're an executive or a plant manager or a production manager or supervisor. Through that kind of tiered approach, we need to be speaking the same language and reinforcing that with our teams.
Yeah.
Right? So it's a pleasure to be involved in that, and I know I wasn't alone in learning new things at different levels in the organization.
Oh yeah, no, you're by having your executive team in those early sessions. It was great when they shared. I thought, I was here really just to learn what the other people are going to learn, and then they got something out of it themselves, which was great.
And I remember one time in particular, because I think I missed the session, so I joined another groups.
Yeah.
And me being part of another teams or a bunch of supervisors and being part of their group, because it was virtual then, it was during COVID. Yeah. That got me to appreciate things, and I think also them to appreciate the importance that I put on frontline.
Yeah, it shows your commitment. So I want to now go a little bit back in time machine a little bit, because I'm guessing you didn't just pop out of your mother's womb with this idea of balancing technical expertise and people. And I'm wondering, as you don't have to necessarily go back through everything in your work history, but when you think of the key things where maybe you built a greater appreciation for people and culture, because I'm guessing early on it was mostly about your technical expertise and solving technical problems. When did the people side come in, and maybe comment on that as far as your work history?
Yeah, I think at some point in my career, I asked myself, am I going to be a technical leader? I'm a mechanical engineer by discipline. I've had a dream of working for General Motors at one time, and
Yeah.
landed a role with Michelin Tire. And at some point in my career, I was given the opportunity to lead a shop, lead people.
Yeah.
And I've been part of probably $1 billion plus in investments in CapEx spend, and I can barely remember any details there.
Mm-hmm.
But I can remember every one of them when my team was successful at something or impressed me. And that just motivated me to be more of a people leader than a technical leader. And hey, listen, we need leaders in both, and both are great.
Yeah.
And good leaders don't need to be the smartest people in the room technically or otherwise. They just need to be able to extract the best out of everyone.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So it's just something that you picked up as you were leading these groups of people, and you just saw what they were capable of.
Yeah, and I think I got more thrill out of that than, seeing money spent or another extra unit come off the line.
Yeah, no, that's good. It also shows you how the emotional side of human dynamics is never really replaced with those other things, even though, again, a lot of those other things get measured. So one of the things that, I am curious then, if you're saying sort of this became somewhat innate to you early on, because that, as you can probably appreciate, somebody who comes up as a mechanical engineer or other disciplines, they don't always get that innateness in it. Is there something else that, like, were you just always interested in people when you think back even to your youth and before you entered the workplace?
I don't think so. I think back, it was more of a, after high school, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I worked for a few years, and then technical diploma in mechanical engineering technology.
Yeah.
Went on for my degree. Wanted to build things. So this, the thrill of people leadership was a bit of an accident.
Yeah, no, I gotcha. Now, interestingly enough, since we're a similar age, I did have the opportunity to go to General Motors Institute. It was called back then, GMI in Flint, Michigan, now called Kettering University, and I got to co-op with GM in St. Catharines for a few years. I will just say that because of the struggles at that time that GM was going through, although it was a tremendous learning experience, and I picked up a lot from it, and I'm very appreciative of that, it wasn't necessarily the best time to maybe be working there. So you might have gotten the better deal at Michelin at the time. I am curious, Jeff, a lot of us learn both from successes and from setbacks. And I just was curious whether there was ever one of those learning moments that you had from a project that by all rights should have been going well, but it didn't, and you learned something very valuable from that. Does anything come to mind?
Yeah, there's one particular thing, and it wasn't so much a project, it was more of a behavior.
Mm-hmm.
I was in a role, huge capital expenditure, a brand new plant, lots of pressures on startup, lots of customer issues and things like that. It was in an environment or an industry that was new to me at the time as well, right? But I witnessed the behavior of a manager, right? Mm-hmm. That it probably dawned on me afterwards. I witnessed the behavior of a manager where they managed by email.
Mm.
One tone in person, but a completely different tone via email.
Yeah, interesting.
And black and white. And I picked that up, and I thought that's never going to be for me.
Yeah.
I'm gonna be the same on email, because that's a good way to communicate facts, numbers, specific dates, etc. But coaching, performance challenges, successes, congratulations, those kinds of things are best done face to face, in person. Well, in some cases virtually. Yeah. But that's the way we live today, geography wise and everything else. So that's a learning that I committed myself to from that point forward.
Yeah, that's a great example. And I always think, probably like parenting, and certainly in managing and leading, is you learn from both the good things you see, because you want to model and copy them, and you also learn about the things maybe that you want to do differently because of what you see. Your comment about email, I've noticed actually as a trend, and it's probably important for anyone who works in a support function like engineering, like health, safety, and environment, or supply chain or purchasing, is that there is this tendency to do remote control either troubleshooting, problem solving, or communication. And I just want everyone to know the value it gives the people you're trying to support and help when you go and walk with them and get to know what they're facing. It's, the concept of Gemba, but not, I think a lot of people hear Gemba and they think of like the meetings that they have at different points in their, around the plant metrics. But Gemba as a philosophy is just go to the scene, go to where it's actually happening. And it's sort of like if a doctor was trying to diagnose you without examining you, it just doesn't work as well. So let me ask you what advice you'd give to a more junior leader, maybe somebody either in engineering or supervisor, who aspires maybe someday to become a production manager or even higher in terms of a VP level or higher than that. What would you suggest that people do earlier in their career, or maybe something you learned was important as you went through your career?
I probably learned it a little bit later and got reminded of it a few times, but I think now it's easy. There's two things. Be a really good junior operations leader. So let's say it's a supervisor. Be a really good supervisor, right? The same things, and this is kind of I witnessed through my career, the same things that make you successful as a supervisor will also make you successful as a production manager, a plant manager, as a director, VP, CEO, right? And there's one thing, and it goes back to our frontline leadership training, Greg, is one of the things that just stuck with me, and it's an element of being a good, junior operations leader, and that's to get to know your people personally, say thank you, and make sure they feel part of the team, right? So that would be, that's the number one thing. The second thing is to, ask for more, like make it clear that you want to do more, take on a next project, take on something challenging. And, if you're practicing number one, I'm sure you'll be successful at number two, and it'll happen as you wish it to.
Yeah. So I mean, the part that was embedded in number one as well is just this idea of deliver results. Like, obviously, take your job seriously, deliver your results that you want. I do like the fact that you built in, though, this ambition or aspirations. We can't assume that other people see that we want to take on more. And although if you have a great leader, they can sometimes see that potential in you before you even see it in yourself. But if you are eager and you want to take on more, then it's just making sure that people know that. Another guest of ours on a different episode had really talked about it's what people say about you when you're not in the room that becomes important. And so think about how people become either fans of yours or advocates for you when they're in meetings that you don't get to attend, and what are they saying about you? And what you're saying is you really want them to say, this person just meets their expectations, is a straight shooter, they treat people well and with respect, and you just want them to think really highly of you, which is usually that package of the two things, your technical expertise and the way that you interact with people. So
there's some folks on the call that might not be familiar with succession planning and talent management and stuff like that, but good organizations, they talk about their entire leadership team, right down from the CEO right down to the junior operations leader, right? And good organizations share that, right? And it's a healthy discussion, and certainly leadership development is part of that. Yeah,
and I think you're right. I think, even the whole area of talent development and succession planning, for a long time it was sort of lip service. Now it's sort of baked into it so that anytime there's a new opening, and even before that, a lot of companies are looking at the top, whatever it is, depending on the size of your organization, top 10, top 100, top 1,000, and they're actually actively looking at where those people are assigned and what their potential is. And for anyone who wants to Google it, you can Google the 9 box, which is sort of a technique that a lot of companies use to sort people into what box they're in as far as their career development path. So if you look into the 9 box and you say, what does it take for me to be put in the 9 box in an area where someone else looks at me and says, this is a person who's ready for the next challenge or the next assignment. I think that's good advice. You and I were talking before we started the call about sort of this idea of the link between culture and KPIs. And we were just chit-chatting, and you said, I've seen it over and over again. Good culture, good leadership does show up in the KPIs. And I thought, we need to get this part on the record, which I told you that we would do. I'm just wondering because we have clients so much. I think everybody in talent development, learning and development, of operational executives, they see the expenditure on training, and it's not cheap these days. And they go, gosh, how are we going to justify this like we would a piece of equipment and get an ROI? And so I'm curious just for you to think about how you've seen the impact between culture and KPIs.
A couple things, we're surveyed to death, right? There's not you can't make a phone call or you can't drop your car off for an oil change without getting 10 reminders to provide Google review feedback, etc. I think one of the most important surveys that are conducted in large operation, well, it doesn't have to be a large operation, any operation or any organization, is the employee engagement. And employee engagement survey, and a well-structured employee engagement survey can, inform the organization of where they're really successful and where there's opportunities. And if they take it seriously and they keep doing the stuff that has made them successful or that they score high on, that's great. But also, figure out what they can do to make the less favorable scores better.
Yeah.
But and it's funny. I've had North American responsibilities for operations. I've had Canada-wide responsibilities for operations, and and actually have plotted this out with data that says if I scored my sites on their employee engagement and then looked at any other KPI, whether it be safety performance, whether it be 5S, like workplace organization, whether it be quality performance, cost performance, productivity, you name it, the higher the employee engagement, the better the result, more favorable the result. And if you think of it, in most of the questions within an employee engagement survey, they're leadership related.
Right.
So investing in that leadership and making your leaders more effective, turns into business results. So that's for me, and also there's a correlation between culture, which is a little harder to define, but usually that culture is winning or not, and perhaps with all those KPIs attached.
Well, you could argue. Thank you for that explanation. I think engagement maybe leads culture. I mean, they probably do a dance with each other. I think culture overall is the collective. I shouldn't use the word residue, but it's like the collective sort of all the things that people experience in the organization and how it runs. So I have a follow-up to your comment about sort of engagement scores and KPI correlation, because my guess is over your history, you've had to make some changes either to leadership or I'm wondering how fast. So if you've ever had to swap out, let's say, a plant manager or you saw low engagement scores and then clearly there was a person that needed to be either nourished or replaced, how soon, like what is the lag? Because we do have customers where it almost feels like we're trying to plant the seed one day with a training program and then dig it up on the next day and saying, has it grown yet? And I'm just wondering, like, when would you expect to see after you start to change leadership and you start to see a culture or engagement improvement? Will the KPIs start to reflect very soon? Do you have any commentary on that?
I got a real simple answer for that. It depends.
Yeah, thank you. Are you ready for politics in the fourth period now, Jeff?
Sometimes that'll never happen. Yeah. It depends, and I'll give you a couple of examples because I've had experience where we've had highly regarded leaders in the organization, and with low engagement scores. But they contributed significantly to the organization. You work and you work and you work, and sometimes you can't. And you have to change it out. And it can be a large organization or really in the hole, so to speak, from an employee engagement point of view, and it takes a long time.
Yeah.
And I've seen other ones where, you hire this crackerjack leader that comes in and it's like overnight.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of factors to it.
Yeah.
But I've never witnessed I've always witnessed a capable leader that comes in, I've always witnessed the engagement score go up,
Yeah.
and all the other KPIs follow.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. It helps encourage me because sometimes it is frustrating to see like trying to measure the change in weeks as opposed to what is probably more realistic in months. Um,
Yeah.
and I guess the other thing that people could take away from this is, and it's not just self-serving because we're in the leadership training business, but it's to know that very seldom will an investment in your leadership capabilities not result in some sort of positive impact on the business. I mean, it would be absurd to think that you would develop leaders and not see any impact on your business. So I think it's just being more open-minded to that there is a strong correlation there. I'm wondering. I got a couple other additional questions, and you've led a major change initiative. I'm just wondering if you comment on what you've learned about implementing change. I know the organization that you're most recently with has a certain model that it uses for change management, which is quite common. I just wondered what you learned about the keys of making changes happen, keeping them on track, not having them get too far behind, getting better buy-in. What have you learned?
I think it's, and I've, fortunately witnessed this a few times, but what's important is like, what is the real problem we're trying to solve,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you said it earlier, and I think it's no matter how big the change is getting to the real problem, but seeing it for yourself.
Yeah.
I've got an example. We did a it was an operational improvement. We're trying to increase the capacity in a particular plant and a bunch of other KPIs. And when you poll the management group, and they were excellent, in high engagement scores and everything else. Like I would give them kudos in their leadership capabilities. But when you ask them, the management group, like, what's the real problem, and you kind of drew it out and sort of draw some hot circles or hot spots around what they thought the problem was.
Yeah.
And then when you went to the floor and asked the floor, well, wait a second, it's different than that.
Yeah.
Right? So there's a disconnect there. So you have to see it for yourself.
Yeah.
And then it's always the classic. We never get away from this, but sometimes maybe we stray from it some. And that is just involving the folks that own the problem into the solution.
Right.
And they're the ones that are going to get excited about it and drive it forward. And oftentimes you'll have to sell the change, meaning it might be to the board of directors for some money, or for the senior management, or for some time and resources, whatever you're going to be. So you've got to be able to tell the right story. Yeah. Right. To tell the right story, and I can remember an example, and this was back in the Purelator days with one of that significant project that you mentioned earlier, when we brought the senior most leadership to the floor and we showed them by having them do it.
Ah, nice.
And it was, there's only a few of the executive at that time that, came from the shop floor. So when we showed them on the shop floor and they tried to do it for themselves and recognize the problem, boom, done. Pretty much sold it on that day.
So I just have to share this because there's a story that we'll tell sometimes in our frontline leadership program, and it would be around the idea that a lot of times when somebody's experiencing a frustration, they might complain, they might murmur and gripe, and a lot of the times the manager sort of is somewhat dismissive, or we've even had leaders where they go, well, my boss really isn't supporting me in handling this situation that's going on. And I said, well, one of the problems is they're not experiencing the same level of frustration that you are. They're kind of removed by a layer, maybe even two layers. So from their standpoint, as long as the production's still running, the frustration isn't as meaningful to them. I said, what would happen is if you were off sick and your boss had to fill in with you, then they'd experience the frustration firsthand. And my guess is there'd be immediate action. And so I love the fact that you had the foresight, at least, or you and your team, to actually expose people to what the situation is so that they can see for themselves, I guess, the absurdity in it and how, it makes total sense to do it a different way. And I think that's a great lesson for anyone listening, is to try to see if you can build it in. I have noticed, because sometimes there's resistance. Oh, why do we need to go there? Let's just deal with it in our meeting. And I think if you insist that this is a good thing for you to see, and because it allows you to see the investment we're making and why it's so important, I think is whatever technique you need to use to get them to actually experience it will go a large distance to their level of commitment, because they're personally involved in experiencing it.
It's kind of funny there's one episode in the what was your name, the Lucille Ball show, where they're doing the chocolates. Do you remember that one?
Eating all the chocolates. Yeah, if you haven't seen it, folks,
go
on YouTube. Yeah.
It's kind of like, it was kind of like that.
Yeah.
And if I think back on it, about when your people impress you, that was a career moment for me in my mind. Or looking back at my career, I remember Ryan, Raphael, and Jay. They knocked it out of the park.
Nice. Hey, you're name checking them. Hopefully they'll listen to the podcast. I know you're big on LinkedIn, so you can share this when it comes out. I did wonder, my last question, and I'm going to combine a couple of things, is just this idea of the way organizations get structured, how things get measured. It can create a little bit of a disconnect sometimes between functional areas and I almost see organizations not tearing themselves apart. That's too dramatic, but you can tell that not everyone is aligned and trying to make the things happen. It sort of creates a series of silos, and inevitably there's waste in there. And I'm going to combine that with the fact that a lot of times leaders at different levels are making decisions that probably should be solved, at one or two levels closer to the work. I just wondered if you comment on just organizations and structure, some of the inefficiencies. How have you kind of dealt with those misalignments and the fact that people aren't, making the right decision for their level? Can you just have a comment on that?
Yeah, a couple of things. Actually, more recently been involved in that. And I think, folks that work in, P&L organizations, there's always the classic, there's all kinds of examples of the classic misalignment that, maybe sales have a revenue target and operations has a different target, kilos, production, something, right?
Yep.
And that can create lots of conflict. And in at least my experience, my witness is, the best functioning organizations have one common goal across every one of the functions, whether it be profitability, revenue, something in there, growth, something, and it probably changes depending on the environment at the time, but the best functions have one. But when that cascades down into each function, maybe there's some subtleties to it, right? So how is operations contributing to profitability? How is sales contributing to profitability? But if they've all got that one common, and for bonuses or for anything else, for any other types of rewards, it's one common goal.
Yeah.
They help out each other. And I've been part of, I've joined in the past. I've joined organizations that have been deeply siloed, kind of ugly. But in my experience, most folks don't want to operate in that kind of environment.
Right.
And there might be reasons that's happened. But if you bring them together and ask them maybe individually, then as a team, you want to operate differently. Most organizations do, and they can figure out how they can work together. And sometimes, and I've also witnessed this. Sometimes it needs some facilitation from someone outside, just because they can't get it together.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great comment. That most people know that siloed or pursuing an objective. I always use this example back in the automotive days, where a supplier had identified a cost savings, and then when they went to the purchasing team, they said, look, this is going to increase purchase price by this, but it's going to save you assembly time. And the person said, I don't care about assembly time. I just care about purchase price. So that would be the negative side effect of silos. But I think everyone can agree that the absurdity of those examples would be replaced with the common sense of a common goal. So that's cool. Just that comment on leaders getting involved one or two layers lower. I just wondered, I'm sure you've witnessed it. Maybe you've even done it where you're too deep in the weeds, or a leader is kind of kicking a problem upstairs a little bit more than they should. Do you have any comment about sort of, we call it decision-making waste, because it's just the wrong person's really making a decision about a given issue. Can you comment on that?
I worked in an organization where we recognized that was a challenge for the leadership team, and made some significant strides in there in that direction to, you know, push the decision making down in the organization. In some cases, those layers weren't even there at that point, so it couldn't happen, right? But as you grew, everything can't go to the CEO's desk, right? And I think there's some factors in that. First of all, you need to have a high level of trust, or at least a commitment to trust, right? Give the autonomy, let people fail, but don't, ridicule or punish them. Ask them what they learned, right? And let's not make that happen again, right? And celebrate the successes when folks do take on the autonomy and make decisions and make things happen, and that way, right?
Yeah.
Quickest way to disengage someone is to not involve them or empower them, right? And again, I go back to that whole, if they're not empowered and if they're not engaged, and that engagement score is shifting to the left, and all the KPIs are dropping.
Yeah, I think it's great that you've highlighted that. And I think that's a wake-up call for anybody who might be witnessing some lower engagement scores, but maybe the operating performance is high. One will lead the other. And so, because you could technically prop up operating performance for a while, even as engagement's dropping, but eventually that will come home to roost. Jeff, you know what? We've covered a lot of ground today. It's been super informative. And I just wondered, is there anything else you wanted to share before we close off our interview?
No, I think this is great, and I applaud the efforts that you're doing, Greg, to try to help all organizations elevate their performance through better leadership.
Yeah, well, I thank you as well, because obviously, in your position, and you looked at different vendors, and we were one of them, and you put us through the paces, and we're very thankful for the work that we did with you. And I know you're moving into another chapter in your career, and I know we'll stay connected. I know I've been asking to have you on the podcast for quite some time, so this is great. Thank you so much. And this is exactly what I had hoped would happen by having you on the podcast. It was a great conversation. If you want to reach out to Jeff Gallant, you can find him on LinkedIn. He's actually fairly regular in his posts. And of course, we encourage you, the way people find out about these podcasts is they share them. Usually most podcast episodes, there's a share button. If people would even go so far as to give it a rating and write a little comment on whatever podcasting platform you use, that helps the podcast get exposed to other people. And of course, we're in the business of developing leaders, mostly in an operations type environment, whether it be frontline leadership or plant leaders, and the organization that Jeff's worked in has used us in both capacities. So if there's anything we can do, it usually starts with a conversation, and you can find us, of course, at our website, uniquedevelopment.com. For now, I'll just say good luck and best wishes for success on your leadership journey.